organise the weather as well as organising the Congress. But seriously, for those of you from the Southern Hemisphere, you don't have to listen to this. But for us in the Northern Hemisphere, today is going to be really, really, really hot, even up here in Glasgow. So make sure that you and your loved ones keep hydrated, please. Thanks. We don't want anybody passing out on us. I've got a couple of, well, that's one of the notices. The other one I've got is that in your printed programme this afternoon, a session at 2 p.m. is entitled When a New Baby with Down Syndrome is Born, and that is going to be taking place not as printed in the 4th suite, but in fact it will be taking place in Gala 1. So 2 p.m, When a New Baby with Down Syndrome is Born, not the 4th suite but the Gala 1. The rooms will be properly labelled, so if you forget by then and you turn up and you see that the labelling outside the room says something different, you'll know that actually, yeah, you needed to remember that notice from this morning. I just thought I would show you, this is, you'll not be able to see it very well, but this is one of our top Scottish newspapers, and the flag ceremony from yesterday has made the front page. So that's a great way to start off. We had immense coverage on telly and all media yesterday about the Congress, so we're delighted for you and delighted for ourselves. So now let's get on with today. So our first speaker, Deborah Fiddler, is a professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at Colorado State University in the United States. Her research expertise is in the area of development in individuals with neurogenetic syndromes, with a specific focus on childhood development, early intervention and educational planning in Down syndrome. She also currently serves as the editor of the American Journal of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities and co-editor of the International Review of Research in Developmental Disabilities. Welcome to the stage, Deborah Fiddler.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here at the World Down Syndrome Congress this year, and I want to thank the conference organizers, Down Syndrome International and Down Syndrome Scotland, and especially Pandora Summerfield for hosting us at this really wonderful event. I'm going to speak to you this morning about early development in young children with Down syndrome and share with you some of the insights that we've gained from our program of research over the past 18 years. The work that I present to you this morning is work that we've been conducting at Colorado State University in the Mountain West of the United States. And our team is the Developmental Disabilities Research Lab, where our main goal is to develop a rich, in-depth understanding of early development in young children with Down syndrome to inform and improve precision early intervention for young children with Down syndrome and their families. My presentation is going to have 3 parts to it. In the first part, I'm going to share with you a few examples of the kinds of things that we've been able to learn about early development in young children with Down syndrome and why learning these kinds of things can be useful. Then I'm going to share with you some information about a specific aspect of development in the area of executive function, a set of thinking skills that we'll talk about and why they're important. We're coming to understand how important they are for early development in young children with Down syndrome. And then I'm going to conclude my talk with some ideas about how we can be using early development and early developmental science to improve and build on our foundations of early intervention. When our team began our program of research studying development in individuals with Down syndrome, It was the late 90s and early 2000s, and we already had a growing understanding of how Down syndrome influences many different areas of development. So there was research on thinking and learning and cognition, speech, language, and communication, relationship development, and behavior. But at that time, a lot of the work had one thing in common. And that one thing they had in common was that most of the work included participants who were older children, adolescents, or young adults. And as a result, we had a growing understanding of outcomes in older individuals with Down syndrome, but we knew very little about how young children with Down syndrome learn and grow, and how early development in Down syndrome may set the stage for some of the outcomes that were being reported in the literature. So our team got very curious and started asking questions about early development. And some of the big questions that we asked were questions like, what can we learn about the needs of young children with Down syndrome to strengthen early intervention? And which skills might be most important for us to be monitoring closely and preparing to intervene upon? We also asked whether or not we could identify certain factors that may place young children with Down syndrome at risk for additional difficulties or perhaps even additional diagnoses. So I'm going to share with you some of the insights that our team has gained from asking those questions. And each time we move on to a different insight, we're going to see this nice little light bulb that signifies that we had a new insight and idea. The first insight that our team gained from our program of research was pretty early on, and that was we learned that to meet the needs of each child, we need to pay very close attention to emerging areas of relative strength and vulnerability. And we learned this from studying a group of toddlers with Down syndrome pretty closely. They were on average about 2.5 years old, and we found already in very young children, by age 2.5, we could identify some areas that on average in the group that we were studying were growing at a faster pace, and some areas that already appeared to be in need of additional supports. Now, of course, not every child in our study showed this profile, but we found that children in our study were more likely than children without Down syndrome to show these types of patterns. Similarly, we could find areas that were emerging with competence. For example, when we studied the early development of practical skills, or what we call adaptive behavior skills, we found that the practical use of social skills was growing at a faster pace than the practical use of motor skills and communication skills. So our first insight was that we can look very closely and identify certain nuances in the different behavioral patterns that we're observing in very young children, and that this could be useful for intervention, and we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. The second insight is one that our team has gained more recently from a set of studies that we've been conducting in our lab in the last few years that focus on very early skills in infants with Down syndrome. In our recent work, we've been very interested in learning about how young children, how infants with Down syndrome pay attention to things and remember things. And there are many different aspects of early attention and early memory that we can study. But we're coming to understand that there's a certain kind of early attention that may be very important for supporting overall early thinking and learning and cognition. And we can see this kind of early attention skill developing when we play little looking games in our lab with the infants who come. And we've seen about 55 infants through our current study. And we play games like this one, where we show a really neat looking toy on one side of their line of vision, and then we show them another really neat looking toy on the other side of their line of vision. And we are able to look closely at how infants control their attention skills very early on, and how quickly and fluidly a young infant is able to shift their attention from looking at one really neat toy to looking at another really neat toy. And it looks like the development of control over early attention skills has some important implications. So we're finding that when an infant with Down syndrome in the first 6 to 9 months has more control over their early attention skills, we see that they're also learning a lot more from their early experiences and their early environment. They're showing higher scores on standardized assessments of cognition. In this case, for my research friends, we use the Bailey 3 cognition scale. And similarly, when we see that an infant with Down syndrome has not developed as much control over their early attention skills, they have not learned as much from their early environment. So we're coming to understand this mantra that we need to pay attention to early attention. Related to that, we've also learned an important set of insights about paying attention to risk factors already in infancy for very young infants with Down syndrome. So in the study that I just described, we became very curious about the infants in our study who had not yet developed as much control over their early attention skills. And we hypothesized, we guessed that maybe these were infants who were born with additional risk factors. And so we had questions about whether or not these might be infants who were born prematurely, or whether these were infants who had a history of a major illness, or perhaps were these infants who had been born with a congenital heart defect. And we did find that one of these factors had a very important influence over the development of attention control, or the ability to shift attention. When an infant in our study was born prematurely, we found that they took longer to develop control over their attention skills than an infant with Down syndrome in our study who was born full term. So these are the kinds of early insights that we've been developing and talking about in our lab. We can identify early areas of strength and vulnerability. We can identify certain early skills that may look like they're supporting overall early learning and thinking skills. And when we learn about these kinds of nuances in early development, we can make really good decisions about what we want to be targeting during early intervention and how to get the best return on our investment for all of the effort that we put in. Similarly, when we can predict who might be at higher risk or who may be at risk for additional difficulties or additional diagnoses from the very beginning, we can determine who might be needing additional supports or increased dosages and intensities of interventions. So I've just shared with you some examples of some of the insights that we have gained from studying overall early development. And now I want to focus our attention on a particular aspect of early thinking that we're coming to understand is very important for overall outcomes in childhood for children with Down syndrome. And that is the area of what we call executive function. And so the next insight that I'm going to share with you is that we are learning that executive function helps us function. Okay, what does that mean? Well, first let's talk about these thinking skills called executive function skills. There's lots of different ways to define executive function in more technical terms, but for our purposes today, I'm going to talk about these thinking skills. Executive function skills are thinking skills that we use whenever we plan and organize our behavior in order to reach goals. Whenever we intentionally set out to solve a problem or to complete a task, we use certain kinds of memory skills and certain types of staying focused skills and certain types of sequencing skills, deciding what to do first, what to do next, what to do after that. And all of these different kinds of thinking skills fall under the umbrella of what we call executive function. And children and grown-ups use executive function skills in all different areas of their life, all day long, whenever we're organizing our behavior in purposeful ways. So our team has been very interested in learning more about the role that executive function plays in development for children with Down syndrome. Now, incidentally, I just want to mention that our team focuses on early childhood and early development. There are colleagues here in this room who have done beautiful work in this area, looking at executive function in older individuals and adults, Dr. Lanfranchi, Dr. Espenson, there's a few other folks here, perhaps. I'm going to share with you what our findings are for early childhood. The first finding that we reported that was really pretty striking to us, that made us motivated to study this construct even closer than we had already, was from a study that we conducted where we asked about what factors help a child with Down syndrome fully participate in a school setting, what we call school function. And we guessed that perhaps there might be a role for overall IQ and for language and communication and for these planning and organizing skills called executive function skills. Well, we found out that if we knew about IQ, that didn't really tell us very much about who was going to be showing really strong participation in school. And language didn't tell us very much either. But when we knew about a child's ability to sequence and organize their behavior in purposeful ways, we could know a lot about who was likely to be showing lots of functional and adaptive participating skills in school. So what are these skills that I'm talking about, these executive function skills? What goes into having strengths in executive function? There are a few different aspects. I'm only going to share, for the purposes of time this morning, the constructs that we are understanding as very, very central for development in children with Down syndrome. So I'm going to start by describing that there is a memory component to executive function, which is the memory skills that we use while we're completing a task, remembering what we're doing, updating how far we are in completing our task. It's called working memory. There are a set of planning skills that, as I mentioned before, help us decide what to do first, what to do second, what to do third. So if I'm going to make a sandwich, I need to sequence my behavior in certain ways, where I first get the ingredients, the bread and the jam, and then I can start putting my sandwich together. There's also a set of staying focused skills in the area of executive function that involves resisting becoming distracted and getting sidetracked. So, for example, if I'm trying to read a book at my desk during quiet reading time and there's a student friend sitting next to me who's tapping their pencil really loudly, we use what's called inhibitory control to not get distracted by the pencil tap and staying focused on what we're doing and reading. Another part of this staying focused aspect of executive function involves resisting doing what comes automatically in favor of doing something that's more planned out. So resisting our impulsive responses in favor of doing something that is more measured and planned. We are coming to understand when we look closely that performance in some of these different aspects of executive function, like the memory aspects and the staying focused aspects of executive function, can tell us a lot about early reading development in the form of being able to identify letters and words. Tells us a lot about how a young child will learn how to solve math problems and even do some of the basic calculation. So the memory and the staying focused, working memory and inhibition aspects of executive function look like they're playing a very important role in early academic achievement. Similarly, the memory components of executive function are telling us a lot about how children with Down syndrome will develop self-care skills and activities of daily living. And in a recent study, we also found that those memory skills are very important for supporting employment outcomes for adults with Down syndrome. So in other words, executive function helps us function. And we're finding that these skills are important in all kinds of contexts for early learning in childhood and Down syndrome. And they support not just learning, but also practical skill use in home, at school, and community settings. And in the spirit of the theme of my talk, we are coming to understand that executive function skills don't just show up on the first day of school, tied up neatly with a bow. These are skills that we are developing from the very earliest moments of development. In fact, in one of our studies, we found that toddlers with Down syndrome who were able to solve a planning task in a more efficient way were also toddlers who were communicating more and showing stronger practical skill use. So, what do the earliest forms of executive function look like? How early can we observe the beginnings of these important skills? Well, one of the exciting parts of the study that we've been conducting on infants with Down syndrome is we haven't just been looking at attention and memory, we've also been looking at the very beginnings of how infants plan their behavior, the planning aspects of executive function. So you see here one of the infant participants in our research study who is playing a game with us where we have this really cool looking rattle, but the rattle is out of reach, and that's on purpose. And right before our very eyes, we can watch as this young infant with Down syndrome comes up with a plan for how to solve this problem. And he realizes that he can pull on the cloth that the rattle is sitting on and bring the rattle closer to him and then play with it. We just saw some of the earliest versions of planning and organizing the behavior in a beautiful way. So we've been looking very closely at the earliest versions of executive function skills, these early planning behaviors in infants with Down syndrome, and what we're finding is something very interesting. We're finding that one profile does not fit all. We're actually seeing different profiles within our group of infants with Down syndrome in the very earliest starting states of executive function skills. So what are we seeing? We've spent a lot of time in the last year or two examining very closely how infants plan their behavior when they're playing with new toys. And we look at how infants are using their eyes and their hands and their mouths to play and explore with different kinds of objects. And when we do some very careful coding and analysis of what we're seeing, we find something very interesting. For my quantitative data friends out there, we did some latent profile analyses using structural equation modeling, basically asking our data, is there one pattern that we're seeing that all of the infants are showing, or are there a few different patterns? And what our analysis showed us was that there was actually really two different patterns that the infants in our study were showing to us. The first pattern, which is in yellow, is the first group that was about 40% of the infants in our study. And they spent a lot of time examining the objects with their eyes, but not so much time integrating their eyes with exploring the object with their hands or with their mouths. The other group that we saw, which was about 60% of the infants in our study, spent a lot of time exploring the object with their eyes as well, but they spent even more time integrating their hands, exploring the object with their hands, and integrating their mouths, exploring the object with their mouths. In other words, they were really actively exploring and planning their behavior with the object, integrating three different modalities in a very coordinated way. Now, we could ask, does this really matter very much how an infant is exploring an object if they just look at it or if they're doing things with their hands and their mouths while they're engaging with the object? Well, it looks like from our early findings that how actively an infant is planning their early exploration in infants with Down syndrome matters quite a lot. In fact, the infants who were doing active exploration, who were actively planning their early play and exploration with objects, were infants who would learn more from their environments in the first 6 to 9 months, and they were also communicating more and understanding more of other people's communications to them. So, in other words, we're finding that the earliest starting states look varied in infants with Down syndrome, with some infants coming in with a very solid foundation of high levels of early planning with objects and lots of early rich engagement, and some infants showing a more passive profile of early planning. And we believe that information like this can be very useful. So let's move to the last part of my talk. How can we use information like this to build on and improve early intervention in young children with Down syndrome? Well, we believe that if we can identify the factors that play a very important role in supporting early learning, if we can identify factors like active, planful exploring of toys in infants, or how much control an infant has over their early attention skills, then we don't need to wait until middle childhood or adolescence to come up with a plan to support an area that is in need of additional targeting. We can be much more proactive than that. We can anticipate the needs of an infant right from the very beginning and provide them with all kinds of tailored experiences. This is an idea that our team has been talking about for quite some time, and we've come up with two sets of strategies for how we can use early development information, like the information I shared with you today, to build and improve early intervention programs for young children with Down syndrome. The first way that we can use this information is to help us plan interventions more effectively, with the idea being that service coordinators and service providers, therapists, and caregivers, developmental specialists who are informed about early development in young children with Down syndrome can be monitoring things more effectively and know where to look for areas of potential vulnerability. They can know that an infant who's born prematurely may need some additional supports right from the beginning in supporting the development of their early attention skills. They can know that an infant who is showing more passive exploration might need some targeted enrichment experiences around early engagement with objects. And so we can take a more anticipatory approach to early intervention and select enrichments that support early learning effectively and be proactive in how we target critical areas from the very beginning. So that's the first way we can use this developmental information. The second way that we can use early developmental intervention is to specifically develop new interventions that are uniquely designed to meet the needs of young children with Down syndrome and the observed profiles that are in the literature. And this is the kind of approach that was pioneered by Dr. Sue Buckley, and she shared with us some of the origin story of her early program of intervention that was very much in line with this spirit. Also, Dr. Len Franke, who I mentioned before, and Dr. Chris Nunnans, who may be here, they've both been doing work in this spirit as well. And our team has gotten on that bandwagon as well. In the last 3 years, we've had a project that was funded by the National Institute of Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, where we've been working with infants with Down syndrome and their parents to practice some of the earliest forms of planning and goal-directed behavior, sort of earliest foundations of executive function. And it's an intervention where we teach parents to play with their infants for about 5 to 10 minutes a day in certain kinds of ways that can practice some of the basics of these early skills. While we're in year 3 of that infant intervention, we have 1 more year, and hopefully I'll have some findings to share with you about what our outcomes look like. But in the meantime, we're also trying to extend forward into the preschool years with an executive function-based intervention for integrated and inclusive preschool settings that will work to strengthen those important thinking skills from the preschool transition into kindergarten. It's called Our Kids, Ready for Kindergarten with Down syndrome. We're at the very early stages of intervention development, but we hope to be able to gain momentum and perhaps even funding for the next phases of that project. Even though my talk this morning focused on early development, I want to make sure that I emphasize that the skills that are important in early childhood are also important throughout the lifespan. And so recently our team collaborated with colleagues at the University of Denver and with funding from the Global Down Syndrome Foundation to develop an adult education series that involves really fun topic areas like dancing and nutrition, but within each class session that we held, we included many different opportunities to practice those different elements of executive function that I described before. So just to conclude with final insights, we have come to learn over the past 18 years that early development is an exciting time and it's an important time for young children with Down syndrome and their families and care providers. And we believe that understanding early development can help us shape the most effective intervention plans. And overall, the more we know, the more we can plan and support healthy outcomes. And I just want to make an important acknowledgement that much of the work that I presented to you today is very much the product of a collaboration with my colleague, Dr. Lisa Donhauer, who co-directs the DE Lab with me, and these other colleagues have made important contributions as well. And I want to highlight the amazing energy, effort, and skill base of our lab coordinator, Emily Schwar, who's an advanced doctoral student. Keep your eyes open for her. She's fantastic. And most of all, we want to thank the children, the families, and self-advocates who participated in our research. We are so grateful for all of the resources and energy that you put into participating in our studies. And that's how to contact me with any questions. Thank you.
You need to hold on to your questions until the meet the expert, meet the plenary speaker session to ask Debbie. And her session of meet the plenary speaker is changed. In your program, it will say that she was going to be part of that session today, but due to a clash of sessions, she will be doing it tomorrow at 11:30 in Ausch 2. I'm pretty sure that some of my staff will be there to ask me questions. One of the things I'd like to say to all of the speakers, whether plenary or parallel sessions, there has been a message put out to you asking if you would be willing to have your presentations shared via our Congress website. So if you would, could you respond to that request so that we can do that? Because I do think there's a rich amount of information here that people will want to be able to refer to afterwards. So I would make that clear now. Thank you. We're now going to the other end of the age spectrum. Our next speaker, Tony Holland. Tony trained in medicine at University College Hospital in London, qualifying in 1973. After some years in general medicine, he then trained in psychiatry at the Maudsley Hospital, London, specialising in the field of intellectual disabilities. In 1992, he moved to the University of Cambridge, and in 2002 was awarded the Health Foundation Chair in Learning Disability, establishing the Cambridge Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Group. This multidisciplinary group has undertaken a broad range of research relevant to the needs of people with intellectual disabilities, including in collaboration with the Down Syndrome Association of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, a series of research studies to better understand the relationship between Down syndrome and the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in later life. In 2010, he was elected a Fellow of the Academy of Medical Sciences, and in 2015, he was awarded the honour of CBE from the Queen. So I'd like to welcome Tony Holland.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also I wish to start by saying what a pleasure it is to be here at Down Syndrome International. I'd like to thank Down Syndrome International and Down Syndrome Scotland for the invitation. It's amazing to see people from so many different countries across the world. Also, I think it's really clever of you to have this session in which we've just heard Deborah talk about early development in infants with Down syndrome, and now I'm going to talk about the other end of life. And I think actually that's a rather nice way to sort of bookend this session. What I plan to do is really to take you through a research journey And by doing that, I hope you will get some insight into how we now understand this relationship between Down syndrome, something that is present at conception and is apparent at birth, to Alzheimer's disease or dementia, something that develops much later in life. Because it seems on the face of it odd that these two conditions should be related to each other. But also, during the course of my talk, I want to emphasize the importance of partnership in research, and then describe some of the clinical findings and also the research approaches and how we begin to understand this link, and end with some prospects for the future. Now, as all of you are aware, that there really have been, I think, dramatic changes in the way people with Down syndrome are now supported. And although there will be countries that may struggle, and there are still many problems in this country and in affluent countries, I think we are seeing a situation where people with Down syndrome now have opportunities that just 10 or certainly 20 years ago no one could have dreamed of. So as this slide illustrates, here's the young men and women who are part of a football club, and that's supported by Premier League in this country, and they're having an amazing time. And also here are two people who are married and have a good adult life. As I say, neither of those we might have expected 10 or 20 years ago, and I think this is enormously positive. However, I think there is this shadow that hangs over the issue of aging people with Down syndrome, and that is this known, now well-established risk for dementia of Alzheimer's disease. But I do want you to go away with a very positive outlook about this. I think firstly, we understand some of the clinical issues much better in terms of how it's diagnosed and what then we might do to best support people with Down syndrome and dementia. I think, as I will illustrate, there are advances in technology, particularly in neuroimaging, brain imaging, that allow us to address the question of why people with Down syndrome are at risk, and ultimately to develop preventative treatments. And that must be the goal of this type of research. But I think there's a third component here that again will be a theme that I come back to during the course of this talk. And that is we're much more aware of the necessary partnerships that we have to establish in order to do research that answers some of these fundamental questions, much in the same way as Deborah talked about in terms of understanding the needs of infants. We need researchers from very different academic backgrounds, but we need partnerships with the Down Syndrome Association of the world, with Down Syndrome International, with families and with people with Down syndrome. None of this would be possible without these partnerships. So I hope that that will be, if you like, a very positive spin on what I'm going to say. So I want to take you through both a rather personal research journey, if you like, as well as a more general research journey. And in a moment I'm going to go back a couple of hundred years. But I just want to try and explain how I and our group and many other groups across the world have, in a sense, approached this issue. How do we understand this risk? And I think from our point of view, we started very much with what I would describe as clinical research. So 15, 20 years ago, though we knew that the risk was there, we didn't really understand quite what the percentage of people with Down syndrome might develop dementia, how dementia might present, and whether it presents typically in someone who already has a developmental disability. We didn't understand its course and so on. And certainly part of our work was to develop things like the complex DS, which is a structured way of assessing someone who may have with Down syndrome, who may have dementia. And as a result of this early work, we developed it with the Down Syndrome Association, various guidance and so on. So I think this is just an example of how, in terms of research, you start with clinical perspective, but then you move on, and this is the phase that I think we're in at present, in which I've said we're investigating causal mechanisms. And this is now possible because of technological advances. And I'll be touching on some of these and the partnerships that we have. And then I think there's the third phase, which I've said at the moment in the future, and that is testing treatments that might prevent Alzheimer's disease developing. But I really want to start the talk with this, and this is a quote from Amy, who's been a wonderful participant in our research over many years and has stuck a head in brain scanners, had blood taken, has done numerous tests over the years. And she's just wonderful. And she was asked what would she say to anyone thinking about taking part in research. And she said this: I'll tell them to go for it. I think I would say something along the lines of how being part of the study could make a huge difference to people in the future. I'll tell them I've done research in the past and I really enjoy it. And Amy was also not so long ago interviewed. I can't remember who did the interview now, but by BBC Radio 4, and for those who are not from this country, the Today programme is one of the sort of premier morning news programmes on the radio. It was wonderful hearing her being interviewed. And a key part of the work that we've done over the years is to work directly with people with Down syndrome and their families in order to enable this type of research to happen. And I just want to just briefly describe some of the strategies and things that we've done. But here is another one of our participants who is showing the bag in his pack in order to come to Cambridge for when he comes for a couple of days for the tests and the brain scan. Maddie is one of our researchers, and I'll be sharing a bit of her work there. This is Russell, and who again is one of our participants, and he took part in a fundraising run with Maddie to help raise money, in this case for Alzheimer's Research UK. This is one of the information booklets we developed. This is a research passport we give people with Down syndrome who do these studies, and it's completed every time they come up. We have newsletters. This is an article written by Glenn, one of our participants, about his experience of coming for research and published in one of the Down Syndrome Association newsletters. So now what I want to do is just take you back and really try and show you how our knowledge has developed over time, often by chance, but also because of technological advances. You will be aware of Landon Down in 1866, who is credited as being the first person to describe what then became known in this country as Down syndrome. But actually around the same time, or a few years after that, there was a description by Fraser Mitchell in the scientific literature, referring to what was then called precipitated disability in someone with Down syndrome. So even then, when people with Down syndrome's life expectancy was really very poor, those people who were living into an older age, there was a recognition that in later life there was this risk of decline. Alzheimer in Germany in 1907 was the first, of course, credited to describing someone who, at postmortems, who deteriorated towards the end of their life. And Alzheimer described what was found in the brains at the brain postmortem, and that is what's called the plaques and tangles, that we now know to be characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. Not long after that, again in the German literature, Struve described the CNR plaques as characteristic plaques in a 37-year-old person with Down syndrome who would die. There was a paper that, interestingly at that time, argued that TB might be the link between Down syndrome and the risk of Alzheimer's disease, because people with Down syndrome were at high risk of TB at that time. This, of course, has been discredited. But I put it in just to show how ideas and hypotheses can arise only to be tested and then shown to be right or wrong. And then we began to have, over the years, a number of descriptions of the relationship between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. But there are modes of great importance in this research. And of course, one of them was Lejeune, who in 1959, just 2 years after the complement of human chromosomes, the 23 pairs were first described the fact that trisomy 21 was the cause of Down syndrome. So very important, because that ultimately set the scene for us understanding, if you like, the biology behind Down syndrome. Then there were various studies looking at the relationship with Alzheimer's disease, but then there's another big leap forward. In 1987, that leap forward in terms of understanding the relationship with Alzheimer's disease. All these studies have suggested that people with Down syndrome do have a high risk of developing these plaques and tangles in later life in their 30s and 40s. And what this found, it found a gene called the amyloid precursor express a protein gene was on chromosome 21. And that meant, of course, people with Down syndrome had 3 copies of that gene rather than the normal 2 copies. And amyloid is the protein that is found and was described by Alzheimer's originally in the plaques that develop in the brain in people who develop Alzheimer's disease, both in the typically developing population and people with Down syndrome. So suddenly it seemed to be clear that amyloid and having too much amyloid may be driving this risk. Because what was obvious is that it was people with Down syndrome, not people generally with an intellectual disability, who had this high risk for Alzheimer's disease. There had to be something specific about having trisomy 21 that carried with it this risk of dementia in later life. And this just shows, this is an example of the plaques, the amyloid plaques. These are extracellular outside the brain cells in the brain. And these are the other major features called tau, made up of a protein called tau, or neurofibrillary tangles, which occur in the cell inside in the brain. And it's probably these tangles that ultimately lead to brain cell death, and with rapid brain cell death, to the loss of skills and the characteristic development of dementia. So what I want to do is now to say, having taken you very quickly on this research journey, to try and say, where are we now? And then come and look at some of the advances that are trying to take us forward in terms of developing treatment. So our present clinical understanding, I think, first of all, there are many studies that over the years, having read the literature which claimed that people with Down syndrome had developed, if you had post-mortem in their 30s, 40s and 50s, you found the evidence of plaques and tangles. Ask the question, what percentage of people with Down syndrome develop clinical features that we would call dementia? The memory changes, the loss of skills that will be familiar now to people that give rise to Alzheimer's disease being one, if not the major form of dementia. And these studies from across the world all suggested that the risk of developing dementia might be present from about the 30s onwards, where just a small percentage of people may have a clinical feature. But it really started up in the 50s and 60s. Now there are differences in the exact figures, and that's largely because of differences in diagnosis or differences, or because the numbers in the studies are rather small, so just having one extra person with dementia swings your percentage on the child use. But all studies agree that there is an increased risk as you get older in exactly the same way as in the general population. The difference is that it's brought forward by about 30 or 40 years compared to the general population. Also, the studies agree that not everyone with Down syndrome, although most will develop, if not everyone will develop some changes in the brain, that doesn't necessarily lead to the loss of skills that we call dementia. So I think we're now also much clearer that the initial presentation of dementia in people with Down syndrome is perhaps a little different, and that it may present with changes in behaviour, changes sometimes described as changes in personality. And it is about observing change, because one of the dynamics in terms of making the diagnosis is to be able to disentangle what's an issue related to someone's developmental disability that's been present throughout their life from something that is new, possibly because of the development of Alzheimer's disease. So all the diagnostic approaches now will ask about the classical questions about someone's memory, about their ability to do things, about their general understanding and so on. But it will also ask about, if you've observed that there's a problem, is that problem new? In other words, could it be due to dementia? Or is it long-standing? In other words, probably due to their developmental disability. And this is what we developed is a diagnostic assessment tool called the Complex DS, which has an informative view. So we interview people, parents or siblings or support staff who know the person very well, asking these sorts of questions and asking about whether they're changed or not. And also I think we see that this early behavioural change that can then change into the more obvious features of dementia in terms of memory loss. So I can remember someone I saw some years ago, and one of the first changes there about the suggested memory problems was that she started forgetting to send birthday cards to her family. And everyone knew that she always sent her to the house to her siblings, her parents, and they always arrived at the right time. And they started not getting the card till they arrived at the wrong time. There was just a hint there that there was a problem with memory development. Then after that, I think the course of dementia is not dissimilar to what you observe in the general population. There's some dispute about whether it's more rapid or not, and I think that's possibly a little bit of an artifact. So the early presentation may be a bit different, but then people perhaps then develop the memory problems and lose the skills, much in the same way as we would if we then develop Alzheimer's disease. We're much more aware of the importance of making certain that you rule out other conditions, particularly those that might be treatable, and which mimic dementia, so underactive thyroid and depression, but also if someone going through major life events, they have sensory impairments and so on. All these things might mimic dementia. So there's clearly a process that you go through if there's evidence. And we're also, I think, much more aware. We don't just say, well, we made the diagnosis, that's it. There's a lot that can be done, even though there aren't treatments that seriously impact upon the course of dementia as yet. There's still a lot that can be done, making certain some physical health remains robust. I think informed support, looking at ways of modifying the environment that helps someone to maintain their skills for as long as possible. There are some of the dementia drugs, although the trials in people with Down syndrome have been limited and rather disappointing. And of course, I think there's the importance of planning for change. So instead of being there in a sense to try and encourage people to develop skills, you are then moving into a new phase where you're trying to help someone maintain skills, knowing that things will change and they will lose skills over time as the dementia progresses. But I think even though the message that someone has Alzheimer's disease is a distressing message, I think there are things now that people do, there are ways of support that make life better, help to maintain dignity and so on. So, having said a little bit about where we are now clinically, I want to say something about where we are now scientifically, if you like. So I mentioned the amyloid precursor gene, and that's led to a major theory, not just because of the observations of people with Down syndrome, but a number of other observations about Alzheimer's disease, and that's called the amyloid cascade hypothesis, the idea that excess amyloid triggers a series of events leading to the tau changes, the tangle changes, to brain cell death, and to dementia. And although this is not everyone agrees with this is one of the major theories that I think is certainly very relevant to understanding the risk of people with Down syndrome. Now here we've got age along the bottom, and the frequency of people affected with Down syndrome. What this slide shows is that probably amyloid is beginning to accumulate in people with Down syndrome from relatively early age, and it's very diffuse in the brain. And then here we've probably got the tangles beginning to develop. And here, and I'll show you this in a moment, if you were to do a particular type of brain scan, you would begin to see changes in the deposition of amyloid in the form of plaques in the brain. And here you have dementia. Now, the reason I mention this is you can see that we've got sort of 20, 30 years course. And we know even in the general population that probably Alzheimer's disease has a very long course. You don't realise you've got it, of course, for a long time. But the point about it is that any intervention that's going to prevent what eventually happens here may have to start really quite early in life. And there's problems with that, and that's, I'll come to that. So, that's a very brief outline of, I think, where we're at in understanding this relationship. But I think there are a number of important questions, and I raise them because I want to then take you through how we might try and answer those questions. Firstly, can we be certain that excess or beta amyloid is the bit that's particularly important in people with Down syndrome is initiating this dementia process? In other words, can we be certain that the amyloid cascade hypothesis is correct? I think it's very likely to be the right hypothesis, but I think we still always have to have a question mark there. What other genes or environmental factors might importantly modifying the age representation of Alzheimer's disease and its cause. In a funny way, one of the positive things about Alzheimer's disease is you don't strictly have to cure it. You have to delay its age of onset, because then people will die naturally of other causes before they get dementia. So it's actually quite important to ask that question, are there other factors? There's something like a gene called APOE, for example, that we know affects your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in the age of onset. We know that things like physical exercise, keeping healthy, keeping mentally active, may also delay the age of onset. But we don't really know how important these are in understanding the risk of people with cancer. And then, and this is for us a very important question, if the amyloid hypothesis is correct, would the early use of a drug that lowered beta amyloid lead to a reduction in the rates of clinical dementia in people with Down syndrome? And if we were to use it to undertake a clinical trial, well, is it justified? At what age would you start the treatment? And how would you decide on whether it was effective or not, given that you might start it in the 20s, but the risk of Alzheimer's disease, the mean age of developing clinical features of dementia is not until the 50s. You can't follow someone up for 30 years to see if the drug is effective or not. So there's a real challenge in doing such trials. So I want to now just show you some examples of how we are trying to answer some of these questions. One of the big advances technologically is the use of brain imaging or neuroimaging, and therefore I can begin to measure brain changes with age and look at how they link to clinical changes. So there are scans of the structure of the brain using MRI or magnetic resonance imaging. You can actually image chemicals in the brain or proteins in the brain like amyloid tau or evidence of inflammation using something called PET scanning. And you can look at things like how the brain's connected, how different parts of the brain is connected, using different types of MRI. All of these, of course, require people with Down syndrome to be willing to lie in the scanner. And PET scans can take 90 minutes. People with Down syndrome have done that. They have been absolutely amazing. So this is an example of an MRI brain scan, a structural brain scan. This is a young person using a PET scan looking at amyloid. A young person. Here's an older person with Down syndrome with evidence of Alzheimer's disease. And the red here is the amyloid deposited in the brain. So you see no evidence of amyloid in this younger person with Down syndrome who has no evidence of dementia. Lots of evidence of amyloid in this older person with Down syndrome. We then went on and were able to show by scanning people with Down syndrome across different ages that this amyloid is shown in the dark red shows which amyloid starts depositing in the brain first, and then it progresses over time. The importance of knowing this is that if you're going to try a new treatment, you want to know where the amyloid first is deposited or first becomes apparent in the brain. Because what you would hope is that any treatment acting on the amyloid pathway would prevent this deposition of amyloid. This is an example of looking at connectivity in the brain. This is people with 40 people with Down syndrome who have scans. This is an age-matched group from the typically developing population. And this is looking at how there's something called the default network, how different parts of the network are connected. And what we're interested in here, of course, is what's the abnormality, potential abnormality in terms of connectivity that is part of the developmental disability, and how might that change as you develop Alzheimer's disease, and how might that then relate to some of the cognitive problems that are observed. I won't go into detail, but what I just want to show you is that these technologies are now possible, and that people with Down syndrome are engaging in that research at enormous effort for them, and I think that's enormously positive. Here's another example of following people up over time. Just a small group have now had 2 scans over time. This is looking at something called cortical thickness, so the thickness of the layer on the top of the brain, and how that relates to amyloid in the brain. You can see, again, that by following people longitudinally in this way, you can see that where amyloid is apparent, you also get changes in the structure of the brain. And if you get changes in the structure of the brain, do you get evidence of cognitive decline? crime or not. That's the thinking behind this type of research. But also there are big advantages in the way that people can image brain cells itself. So now it's possible by taking a skin biopsy in people with Down syndrome, small skin biopsies for us, that are then converted in the laboratory into what's called stem cells. Those stem cells can be converted into brain cells in the laboratory dish, because you can't study the brain at that sort of level, so you have to do it in this way. This is the work of WDSC and his colleagues at the Gurdon Institute in Cambridge, and these are pictures of these cells, these brain cells, developed from skin cells, growing in a dish. And this is evidence of amyloid. And here, this is the number of days after the cells were created, and the amount of amyloid. You can see in this group cells donated by someone with Down syndrome, derived from skin cells. Amyloid goes up quite dramatically, and this is someone who doesn't have Down syndrome. Again, I'm showing you this because it's an example of how this new technology, this dramatic technology, can help us look directly at brain cells and what's happening. So I would argue that this amyloid cascade hypothesis, people with Down syndrome having too much an extra copy of a gene, too much amyloid, and that this over time gives rise to change and to the risk of Alzheimer's disease. Because the treatments have been to try and alter this balance, reduce the brain amyloid load by making certain it goes out of the body into the periphery, away from the brain. And there have been a number of approaches to this. The problem is that trials of anti-amyloid agents, if you like, in the typically developing population, of course, have had to start when someone is already at the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. And they'd be very disappointed in these trials. They haven't altered the course of Alzheimer's disease. And the big argument, is that because the amyloid hypothesis is wrong? Or is that because the treatment is started too late? The big advantage, of course, in terms of people with Down syndrome, is that you know that they're at risk for this. So providing you've got a safe drug, you could make the case for starting much earlier. You don't have to wait for them to have clinical features. And then if you lower amyloid, which would the drug then be effective or not? And one of the problems then is, of course, exactly what treatment do you use, at what age do you start it, and how do you determine the benefit or not for the reasons that I mentioned. But we did a survey of families, and many families were very supportive of the idea that such a trial should take place. I want to end my talk by just saying that our emphasis now is to try and look at some very early markers of what may be happening very early before dementia becomes apparent. And I just want to show you some work that we're doing with the retina on the eye. This is work done by Maddie Walcott as part of her PhD. And the retina embryologically develops from the same tissue as the brain. We know that people in the general population who have evidence of Alzheimer's disease, their retina is thinner than an aged naturally who don't have Alzheimer's disease. And that's probably because of retinal cell death. And we argue that the same would be apparent to people with Down syndrome. And this is an instrument very similar to when you have your eyes tested. But just to say, we actually found out the opposite. We found that the retina of people with Down syndrome is thicker than typically developing population. And we don't quite understand that, but there are various other tests that are now good that makes us think that the retina may be a useful marker because it's so easy to look at that will help us understand and evaluate treatment. This is some work from America in which they've shown that if you image with a particular type of retinal image machine, you can actually show deposition of amyloid in the eye. So I show this as just an example of how it's not just the brain we're looking at, but also the eye. Now, I'm aware my time has run out, and I just want to end my talk in two ways. One, in this audience of international audience, to say that research in this field is international. In France, Jerome Lejeune first tried microprocessing in 1921. The Lejeune Foundation supported a lot of research in Down syndrome. In America, there are major studies on Down syndrome. You heard about studies from Deborah Fiddler. There's work elsewhere in many other countries in the world. In a way, it doesn't matter where that work is done, as long as it's done ethically, as long as it's scientifically right. But our aim in the long term is to make certain that this young lady here, with her lovely smile, has a good opportunity in life. There's much that's happening that's very positive. Can we now come up with ways of preventing dementia and ensuring that she has a long life and a healthy life? I'd like to thank many people, and particularly people with Down syndrome and the Down Syndrome Association. But this is a very much a collaborative effort with funding from many organisations. So thank you very much.
From our perspective at Down Syndrome Scotland, we know, working with researchers in Scotland, that recruitment to studies can be difficult. So if you're a parent or a person with Down syndrome and you think you might be interested in getting involved in any kind of research, then why not speak to some of the speakers that you've heard over the Congress to find out what that might really mean for you and for your loved one, because recruitment is often difficult. I think both speakers have spoken that they have managed to recruit, but we hear from lots of researchers who really struggle and who we try to help recruit. And often that's because people don't know what research means. What will participating in a study mean? So please take the opportunity to find out wherever you live in the world, because as Tony says, research is going on all around the world. So I'd urge you to find out a bit more and see whether or not you think you might be able to participate. Anyway, it's coffee time. We're a bit late. We will reconvene again in whatever we're doing at 11:30. So take it with you and see you back here later on today. Have a great day.